For 6 months, my mother-in-law slowly poisoned my husband for his inheritance. I watched, collected proof, and nearly lost my mind. When I finally confronted her with the video, she didn't even flinch. She just looked at me and said, "You're in my way." She didn't deny it. That's the part that freezes my blood, even now. When I finally showed her the evidence, the grainy phone footage of her standing in my kitchen, her elegant hand tipping a small dark bottle over her own son's plate, she didn't gasp. She didn't cry or scream or call me a liar. She simply watched the clip play on a loop, a faint, unreadable smile on her perfectly painted lips. The air in that historic Charleston home, usually thick with the scent of jasmine and old money, suddenly felt thin and sharp, like a shard of glass in my throat. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was as smooth and cool as the marble countertops. "Well, Eliza," she said, looking right through me, "a woman's imagination is a powerful thing, isn't it?" It was then I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war. But this war didn't begin with a bang. It started 6 months earlier, with a whisper, a shadow, and a bowl of her famous family recipe gumbo. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own home, like you were seeing something everyone else refused to, do me a favor and just hit that like button. It's a silent signal that you understand, and it tells me I'm not alone in this. My name is Eliza, and for the first 3 years of our marriage, my life with Liam was the kind of beautiful story people tell about Charleston. We lived in a restored single house south of Broad Street, the kind with a long, graceful porch and a garden that smelled of salt and magnolias. Liam was brilliant, a rising star in his family's lucrative shipping business, but he had a gentle heart that balanced my more pragmatic nature. He was my anchor, my quiet harbor in a world that could be relentlessly loud, and his mother, Catherine, was the undisputed queen of this world. She was a formidable Southern matriarch, always dressed in impeccable linen, her silver hair styled perfectly, her words dripping with a honeyed charm that could easily mask the sting of a hornet. To the outside world, she adored her only son. To me, she was a gatekeeper, and I was the visitor who had overstayed her welcome. Her approval was a currency I could never seem to earn. The change, the real, terrifying shift, began the day my father-in-law, Walter, had his stroke. It was severe, leaving him bedridden and voiceless, a titan of industry suddenly silenced. The weight of the family empire and Walter's considerable fortune now rested squarely on Liam's shoulders. And Catherine, in her grief, became attentive, obsessively so. She started visiting 3-4 times a week, always bearing food in heavy porcelain dishes, convinced that only her cooking could sustain Liam through the crisis. "A man needs his mother's strength when his father is fading," she'd say, patting Liam's hand, while giving me a look that suggested my own efforts were woefully inadequate. The first offering was her legendary low-country gumbo. It was a Sunday afternoon, the air heavy and humid, promising a thunderstorm. She bustled into our kitchen, waving me away from the stove. "No, no, dear. You rest. I've got this." She served Liam a massive bowl, then another, ignoring his protests that he was full. "Nonsense, darling. You're wasting away," she cooed. I ate a small portion myself. It was rich, savory, and tasted perfectly normal. But that night, everything changed. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to find Liam in the bathroom, retching violently. A vicious migraine clamped down on his skull, and he complained of a strange, buzzing dizziness. He was pale and sweating, his skin clammy to the touch. It was awful, but we chalked it up to a stomach bug, or the immense stress of his father's condition. Catherine was devastated when I told her the next day. "Oh, my poor boy," she lamented over the phone. "He's working himself into the ground. See? He needs proper nourishment." The next week she brought a shepherd's pie. And again, Liam was violently ill that night. The pattern was identical: the visit, the special meal only for him, and the agonizing night that followed. It was on that second sleepless night, as I held a cool cloth to Liam's forehead, that the first ugly little thought crept into my mind. Coincidence is a funny thing. Once is an accident. Twice is a pattern. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was just the beginning. Intuition is a dangerous thing in a family built on appearances. In Charleston, you're taught to smooth over the rough edges, to smile through discomfort, to never ever air your dirty laundry on the front porch for the neighbors to see. And my intuition was screaming that the laundry piling up in my house was not just dirty, it was toxic. After that second illness, the shepherd's pie incident, I started watching. Not just observing, but studying. I studied the way Catherine's hand would linger on Liam's arm a second too long, the way her eyes, the same piercing blue as her son's, would flicker toward me when she thought I wasn't looking. I was becoming a detective in my own home, and the prime suspect was the one person Liam would never, ever suspect. The paranoia was suffocating. I'd lie awake at night, listening to Liam's troubled breathing, and ask myself if I was going insane. Was I so desperate to find a crack in Catherine's perfect facade that I was inventing one? Was I turning a grieving mother's love into something monstrous simply because she never fully accepted me? The third time sealed it for me. It was a Wednesday. Catherine arrived looking serene in a pale yellow dress, carrying a silver thermos. "For my darling boy's nerves," she announced, her voice resonating with warmth. "A special tisane, chamomile, lavender, and a few little remedies from my personal garden. It will help him sleep." She spoke of the ingredients so openly, so lovingly, that I felt a flush of shame. Here she was, trying to heal her son, and here I was, thinking the worst. Liam, exhausted from another brutal week at work, was grateful. He drank a full mug of the steaming, fragrant tea before dinner. "It's delicious, Mom. Thank you." I watched him, a knot tightening in my stomach. "I'm not a big tea drinker," I said, forcing a smile. "It gives me headaches." It was a flimsy excuse, but it was the first time I consciously created a control group in my terrifying little experiment. The subjects: one husband who drank the tea, one wife who did not. The results came in at 1:30 a.m. It was the worst episode yet. Liam was disoriented, his hands trembling as he tried to grip the sides of the sink. The migraine was back with a vengeance, but this time it was accompanied by a terrifying mental fog. He couldn't remember a phone call he'd had with his office that afternoon. "Eliza, what was I talking to David about?" he asked, his eyes wide with fear. Seeing him so vulnerable, so confused, shattered the last of my self-doubt. This wasn't stress. This wasn't a coincidence. This was poison. I felt fine, of course. Perfectly, horribly fine. While I held him, I could still smell the faint scent of lavender from the dregs of the tea in his mug downstairs. And I knew it was a lie. Whatever was in that cup was no simple remedy. That weekend, she brought her famous pecan pie, Walter's favorite. The whole house filled with the scent of toasted nuts and brown sugar. As we sat on the porch, she cut 3 slices. One for Liam, one for me, one for her. But I watched her hands. She served Liam from the very center of the pie, a large, perfect slice. She served herself and me smaller pieces from the edge. I took a tiny, almost imperceptible bite from the very tip of my slice. I let it dissolve on my tongue, pushing past the overwhelming sweetness, searching. And then I found it. Faint, almost non-existent, but there. A sharp, metallic bitterness. An aftertaste that didn't belong. It was the taste of betrayal. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a gut feeling, a deep intuition that something was terribly wrong, even when everyone around you said you were crazy? Just type "I knew it" if you've been there. I want to know I'm not the only one who has trusted that voice. The taste was gone in a second, washed away by sugar and butter, but the knowledge it left behind was permanent. I couldn't just feel it anymore. Now I could taste it, and the time for quiet observation was over. The time for gathering proof had begun. The taste of that bitter pecan pie was my point of no return. It was the moment my fear finally burned away the shame and self-doubt. I wasn't a paranoid wife. I was a witness, and a witness needs to keep records. That night, after Liam finally fell into a restless, medication-induced sleep, I sat in the cold blue light of my laptop in the study. I couldn't risk a physical notebook, not in a house where Catherine felt she had the right to wander freely, rearranging bookshelves and tidying drawers as if it were still her own. Instead, I created a password-protected document in a cloud server, hidden inside a folder labeled Charleston Historical Homes Survey. I named the document Project Nightingale. It sounded clinical, detached, a desperate attempt to create distance from the horror I was about to chronicle. My fingers trembled as I typed the first entry, my mind casting back through the fog of the last few months. Entry 01. Sunday, May 12th. Offering Low Country Gumbo. Delivered in her heirloom porcelain tureen. Subject: Liam. Notes: Kay insisted on serving him 2 large bowls. Commented: a man in his position must be a fortress. I'm building up his defenses. I had a small portion from the same pot. Reaction: onset of symptoms. Approx. 2 a.m. severe migraine, nausea, violent stomach cramps. Duration: to 14 hours. Liam attributed to stress. Control: Elisa. No symptoms. Entry 02. Monday, May 20th. Offering shepherd's pie. Subject: Liam. Notes: Kay mentioned it was packed with iron and nutrients for brain function. She watched him eat every bite. I claimed I'd already eaten. Reaction: onset approx. 11:30 p.m. Dizziness, acute headache, vomiting. Duration: to 10 hours. Liam worried it was a recurring stomach virus. Control: Elisa. No symptoms. Entry 03. Wednesday, May 29th. Offering calming herbal tisane, chamomile lavender garden remedies, served in silver thermos. Subject: Liam. Notes: Kay presented it as a cure for his stress, induced insomnia. Liam drank 1 full mug. I declined. Reaction: onset approx. 1:30 a.m. Extreme disorientation, trembling hands, severe migraine, and short-term memory fog. This was the most severe reaction to date. Duration: to 18 hours of lingering effects. Control: Elisa. No symptoms. I kept typing, adding the pecan pie, a lemon poppy seed loaf, a small container of vitamin-rich chicken broth. With each entry, a cold clinical certainty settled over me. The document grew from a collection of fearful notes into a horrifying logbook of a systematic assault. It was an indictment, spelled out in dates, times, and symptoms. Staring at the screen, the pattern wasn't just clear, it was a blaring alarm. Visit plus Catherine's food equaled a night of agony for Liam. No visit meant a healthy, happy husband. It was a perfect, 1-to-1 correlation. Living this double life was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I had to host my husband's would-be poisoner in my home with a smile. I had to listen to her saccharine-sweet concerns for his health, all while the evidence screamed from my hidden file. One afternoon, she found me on the porch tapping away on my phone. "Always so busy, Eliza dear," she'd said, her voice smooth as silk. "Planning another one of your little garden projects?" I felt my blood run cold. I forced a laugh and quickly switched the screen to a photo of a new hydrangea variety I was considering. "Something like that," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs. Her eyes lingered on me, sharp and intelligent. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting a poisoner. I was fighting a master of manipulation, a woman who saw everything and revealed nothing. The list was my shield and my sword, but I was terrified that one wrong move would cause her to drop the mask entirely. And I had no idea what I would see when she did. Looking at the finished log, the question was no longer if my mother-in-law was poisoning my husband. The question was why. For 3 days, the Project Nightingale file burned a hole in my digital life. It was a truth so toxic, I was terrified to speak it, but the thought of staying silent was even worse. Every time Liam rubbed his temples or winced with a phantom stomach cramp, I felt a surge of desperate urgency. I couldn't let this continue. The list was no longer just for me, it was for him. I had to make him see. I chose a Tuesday evening, a quiet night with no plans. The air was soft, the house was still, and I hoped the calm would provide a safe harbor for the storm I was about to unleash. He was in the living room, reading over some business ledgers, looking exhausted. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "Liam," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "Can we talk for a minute? I've noticed something, and I need you to look at it with an open mind." He put the papers down, his expression weary but open. "Of course. What's up?" I took a deep breath and sat beside him on the sofa, pulling up the hidden file on my phone. "I've been keeping track of when you've been getting sick," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and factual, like a doctor presenting a diagnosis. "I want you to look at these dates." I showed him the screen, the neat columns, the chillingly consistent data. I walked him through it, entry by entry. The gumbo, the pie, the tea, the dates of Catherine's visits, the almost immediate onset of his symptoms. The perfect correlation. "Do you see?" I whispered, my finger tracing the lines on the screen. "Every single time she brings you food, this happens, and on the weeks she doesn't, you're perfectly fine. It's not a coincidence, Liam. It can't be." I watched his face as he processed the information. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of confusion, maybe even fear. The logic was right there, undeniable. But then, it was like a mask slammed down. The confusion hardened into disbelief, and the disbelief curdled into a deep, defensive anger. He pulled away from me, standing up and pacing the room. "What are you trying to say, Eliza?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you actually accusing my mother of, what? Poisoning me?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "That's insane. That is the most insane thing I have ever heard." "I'm not saying. I'm just showing you the pattern," I pleaded, my own voice starting to shake. "Look at the evidence." "Evidence?" He turned on me, his eyes blazing. "This isn't evidence, it's a crazy conspiracy theory. My father is dying. The entire weight of his company is on my shoulders. I haven't had a full night's sleep in months. Of course I'm sick, Eliza. My mother, who is also grieving, is the only one trying to take care of me, and you're twisting her love into something ugly and malicious." The words were like slaps to the face. He wasn't just defending her, he was attacking me. "You've never liked her," he went on, his voice rising. "I've seen it. You've always been looking for something, some reason to paint her as the villain. Are you jealous that I need her right now? Are you trying to drive us apart?" That was the moment my heart truly broke. I was holding the truth in my hand, a truth that could save his life, and he was looking at me like I was the enemy. He saw me not as his protector, but as his persecutor. The isolation was absolute. I was utterly and completely alone in this. Have you ever been the one to deliver a hard truth, only to have the people you love turn on you for it? To be made the villain in a story where you were just trying to be the hero? If you know what that feels like, just type the word alone in the comments. Let's see how many of us have stood there. He refused to look at the phone again. "Delete it," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Delete it, and we are never speaking of this again. Do you understand me?" He walked out of the room, leaving me on the sofa in the crushing silence. The truth wasn't enough. Facts weren't enough. To break through the wall of a lifetime of a mother's love, I needed something more. I needed a motive. And I needed proof so absolute, so irrefutable, that even a son blinded by love would be forced to see. The week after our fight was the loneliest of my life. Liam and I moved through our beautiful, sun-drenched home like polite strangers. The air was thick with unspoken words. He was meticulously courteous, asking about my day, complimenting my cooking, anything I made myself. I noticed, but his eyes were guarded. The warmth was gone. He had chosen his side, and I was on the outside, looking in. He had followed my directive and deleted the file from my phone, a symbolic act of erasing a truth he couldn't bear to face. But I had a backup. Of course, I had a backup. I was learning to think like a spy, a strategist in a Cold War being fought within the walls of my own marriage. He was treating me like I was fragile, like my paranoia was a symptom of the stress we were all under. He'd suggest I go to a spa or take a weekend trip with friends. Anything to get me out of the house, away from his mother, away from the problem he believed I had invented. I knew arguing with him further was useless. The wall of denial was too high, fortified by a lifetime of maternal devotion. So I watched, and I waited, and I tried to understand what held him so completely in her thrall. The answer, when it came, was far more pragmatic and sinister than simple love. It was about the one thing that defined his family, the one thing that mattered in Charleston above all else, legacy. And legacy was built on money. It happened late one Thursday night. I found him in the study, a glass of bourbon in his hand, staring at a complex schematic of a new container ship. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I'd ever seen them. He looked like a man carrying the world on his shoulders. The silence had become unbearable, so I took a risk. "Is it about the shipyard?" I asked softly. He flinched, not having heard me come in. He hesitated, then gave a short, bitter laugh. "It's always about the shipyard." He finally opened up, not about us, but about the business. He explained that to keep the company competitive, he needed to secure a massive capital investment over $10 million to modernize their fleet. A deal with a European logistics firm was on the table, a game changer that would secure their future for the next 50 years. "It's the move my father wanted to make before he got sick," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So what's the problem?" I asked. "The board trusts you." He drained his bourbon, the ice clinking in the empty glass. He wouldn't look at me. "It's not the board. To release that much capital from the family trust, it requires 2 signatures. He paused, and my blood ran cold because I knew what was coming next. Mine as acting CEO, and the signature of the trust's primary overseer. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, trapped look I'd never seen before. "My mother," he whispered. "My father appointed her as trustee years ago. He said it was to guide me, to make sure I was ready. But the result is, she has the final say. On everything." The room seemed to tilt. It all clicked into place. This wasn't just a son's love for his mother. This was a financial hostage situation. His professional life, his father's legacy, the livelihoods of hundreds of employees, it was all in Catherine's perfectly manicured hands. His refusal to believe me wasn't just denial, it was self-preservation. To accuse her would be to commit professional suicide. He would be risking everything his father had ever built, based on what he had convinced himself were just his wife's paranoid feelings. "If I cross her, Eliza," he said, his voice cracking with the strain of it all, "if she even for a second thinks that I am ungrateful or unstable or not fit to lead, she can block this deal. She can let the company my grandfather built wither and die, all under the guise of protecting the family's assets. So don't you see? I can't listen to this. I can't afford to." He saw it as a choice between the company and my feelings. But I saw the truth. Catherine wasn't protecting a legacy, she was leveraging it. She had forged a cage of love and money and locked her own son inside. And I knew then that my mission had changed. It wasn't enough to prove she was a poisoner. I had to find a way to give him back the keys. Knowing about the $10 million leash Catherine held around my husband's neck changed the entire game. My secret log, my Project Nightingale, suddenly felt flimsy. It was my word against hers, and in a world where her signature was worth more than my truth, I knew I would lose that fight. Liam wasn't just trapped by love, he was trapped by legacy. To free him, I couldn't just present a pattern. I needed to present a case. I needed cold, hard, physical proof, the kind of evidence that couldn't be dismissed as a wife's hysteria. I needed the poison itself. My strategy had to evolve. I was no longer just an observer, I had to become a collector. The thought was terrifying. This wasn't just about typing notes on my phone anymore. This involved deception, stealth, and the very real risk of being caught. The first step was securing a location for my secret archive. Our main kitchen freezer was out of the question. Catherine was in and out of it too often, rearranging things to her liking. But in the humid, musty basement of our old Charleston home, there was a forgotten deep freezer that hadn't been plugged in since we moved in. It was perfect. I spent an afternoon cleaning it out, my excuse to Liam being that I wanted to stock up on supplies for hurricane season. He barely registered it. The hum of the freezer kicking on was, to me, the sound of the investigation officially beginning. The first collection was the most nerve-wracking. A week after my discovery about the trust, Catherine came over with a beautiful earthenware pot of what she called restorative beef and barley soup. As she ladled out a huge portion for Liam, she smiled at me. "I made enough for you too, dear." I felt my stomach clench. "Oh, thank you, Catherine, but I had a late lunch." "I'm stuffed," I said, hoping the lie sounded convincing. I had to watch Liam eat it, every spoonful feeling like a countdown. My chance came when Liam took a business call on the porch. Catherine was in the garden, inspecting my roses with a critical eye. My heart was a jackhammer. With trembling hands, I took Liam's half-eaten bowl to the kitchen, scraped a large ladleful into a sterilized glass jam jar, and screwed the lid on tight. I wrapped the still-warm jar in a dish towel and carried it down to the basement, my every step a paranoid creak on the old wooden stairs. Down in the damp, cool dark, the single light bulb cast long shadows. The freezer felt like a tomb. I took a roll of masking tape and a black marker from my pocket. My handwriting was shaky as I wrote, K.S. Hashone. Beef soup, June 19th. The initials stood for Catherine Samples. It looked official, forensic. It made the horror of it all feel both more real and more surreal. I placed the jar inside the vast empty freezer. It looked so small, so pathetic. A tiny vessel of a monstrous secret. Over the next month, the collection grew. It became a grim, methodical ritual. A slice of her orange-glazed ham, double-wrapped in freezer bags. A small jar of her special recipe iced tea, which she insisted only Liam drink, because it was brewed for a man's constitution. A piece of quiche from a brunch she hosted. Each item was carefully labeled and placed in the cold, humming darkness of the basement freezer. The archive was growing, a frozen library of her crimes. Each sample represented a night I'd spent holding Liam's head, wiping his brow, and listening to him murmur about stress and exhaustion, never knowing the real reason for his agony. I was living a lie of 1,000 tiny details. The fake smiles, the forced pleasantries, the terror of her watching me as I cleared the dishes. The freezer in the basement was my only confidant, the only place where the truth was being stored. Looking at the 5 jars and 3 plastic-wrapped parcels lined up in the frost, I felt a chilling sense of accomplishment. I had the evidence. It was right here. But it was useless until I knew exactly what was inside. The freezer in the basement became my secret sanctuary and my private hell. It held the truth, but it was a truth I had no way to unlock. I couldn't exactly walk into a private lab with a jar of frozen gumbo and say, "Can you test this for poison? I think my mother-in-law is trying to kill my husband." They would think I was insane. And if Catherine got wind of it, I couldn't imagine what she would do. I was sitting on a mountain of physical evidence, but I was still paralyzed. I realized I was missing the most crucial piece of the puzzle, the motive. Why would Catherine, a woman who seemingly had everything, risk it all to harm her own son? Control over the business was one thing, but this felt deeper, darker. It felt like a plot, and I was missing the final act. I needed an ally, someone on the inside who was not under Catherine's spell. My mind immediately went to Liam's Aunt Helen. She was Walter's younger sister, a retired history professor who lived a quiet, elegant life down in Savannah. At family gatherings, Helen was always a bastion of calm, observant intelligence. She was never unkind to Catherine, but there was a polite, impenetrable wall between them. Helen saw things. I knew she did. I called her. Using the excuse of needing to research a historic garden near her home for a new client. She agreed to meet me for tea without a moment's hesitation, her voice warm and steady over the phone. We met at a small, sun-dappled tea room in Savannah's historic district. The contrast between the genteel setting the delicate china, the scent of scones and lemon curd, and the ugly purpose of my visit was jarring. I didn't know where to begin, so I started with the truth, or at least a version of it. I told her how worried I was about Liam. I described his recurring illnesses, his fatigue, the strange mental fog. I explained the immense pressure he was under and how his mother's constant smothering attention seemed to be making things worse. I didn't use the word poison. I didn't show her my list. I just laid out the pattern, my voice trembling slightly, and watched her face. Helen listened, her hands perfectly still around her teacup. She wasn't surprised by my description of Catherine's behavior. "Catherine has always loved with her fists clenched, Eliza," she said softly, her eyes full of a sad wisdom. "She holds on so tightly, she ends up crushing the very thing she's trying to protect." She paused, taking a slow sip of tea. "But this sickness, this pattern you describe, that's something else." She looked at me then, a long, searching look. "I think you need to understand the full picture. You need to know what's in my brother's will." My heart stopped. She explained that Walter's estate was considerable, well over $3.5 million in property, stocks, and assets. The will was straightforward. Upon his death, it would be split evenly between his wife Catherine and his only son Liam. It all sounded perfectly normal until she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But Walter's lawyer, years ago, convinced him to add a survivorship clause. It's a standard feature in wills for estates of this size, meant to prevent legal complications if 2 beneficiaries die in quick succession. It states, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, that if a beneficiary dies within 30 days of Walter's passing, their share is not distributed to their own heirs. It's absorbed back into the original estate and passed to the surviving primary beneficiary. The air left my lungs. The teacup rattled in my saucer. It was the key, the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. Catherine wasn't just making Liam sick. She was keeping him weak, managing his health, waiting for Walter to die. And once he did, a 30-day clock would start ticking. In that window, if Liam were to die from a sudden illness, a stress-related heart attack, an unfortunate accident, his entire inheritance would go directly, cleanly, and immediately to her. I wasn't married to a man being controlled. I was married to a man with an execution date. Have you ever uncovered a secret so dark it changed the way you saw everything and everyone around you? A truth that felt like a point of no return? If you have, just type the year it happened in the comments. No explanation needed. We'll know. Driving back to Charleston that evening, the setting sun painting the marshes in fiery shades of orange and red, the world felt fundamentally different. I was no longer just a worried wife. I was the sole guardian of a man on death row, and his executioner was the woman who called him her son. The drive back from Savannah was a 4-hour blur of Spanish moss and existential terror. The knowledge of the 30-day clause was a parasite in my brain, reframing every past interaction, every kind word from Catherine, into a scene from a horror movie. Her loving concern wasn't love, it was reconnaissance. Her home-cooked meals weren't nourishment, they were weapons. I was no longer just trying to expose a secret, I was trying to stop a countdown to an execution. This new reality changed how I moved, how I spoke, how I breathed. My fear made me a terrible actress. I could no longer play the part of the slightly wary but dutiful daughter-in-law. Now, when Catherine came to our home, my body went rigid. I watched her hands with an unnerving intensity. My attempts to protect Liam became clumsy and obvious. One evening, she arrived with a beautiful glazed ham. As she was about to slice a thick piece for Liam, I hurried into the kitchen, pulling a pan from the oven. "Catherine, you shouldn't have," I exclaimed with a brittle false brightness. "I just finished making Liam's favorite shrimp and grits. We can save the ham for tomorrow." I whisked his plate away and replaced it before he could protest. The look Catherine gave me was not one of disappointment. It was a look of cold, calculating assessment. A flicker in her eyes that said, "So, the game has changed." I had stopped being a nuisance and had become an obstacle. And Catherine did not tolerate obstacles. Her counterattack was not a frontal assault. It was a campaign of insidious psychological warfare designed to dismantle my credibility and paint me as the true source of chaos in our home. She started with whispers to Liam. He'd come home from work and I could tell she had called him. His expression would be clouded, his questions carefully casual. "Mom mentioned you seemed a little on edge today, Eliza. Is everything okay? You know you can talk to me." She was positioning herself as the concerned observer, and me as the unstable wife. Then, the whispers became more pointed. She suggested to Liam that my anxiety might be causing psychosomatic symptoms in him. "The mind is a powerful thing, darling." I overheard her telling him on the phone one afternoon. "When a woman is unhappy, the whole house can feel sick." The final, brilliant, and evil move was planting the evidence. She knew I was looking for a poison, so she decided to give me one and make it my own. One Saturday, while I was out getting groceries, she let herself in. Later that day, Liam and I had the worst fight of our lives. He came into our bedroom, his face pale and his hands shaking. He was holding a book. "I was looking for my cufflinks on your nightstand," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "and I found this." He held it up. It was a dense, academic-looking book, titled A History of Herbal Poisons. My blood turned to ice. I had never seen it before in my life. "Why do you have this, Eliza?" he asked, his eyes pleading for an explanation that made sense. Before I could even stammer out a denial, he said, "And then I found this." He walked to my closet and pulled a small, amber-colored bottle from the back, behind my shoeboxes. It was filled with a dark, bitter-smelling liquid. "Mom was worried. She said you'd been acting erratically, reading strange things. I told her she was wrong. I defended you." He was on the verge of tears. "But now this? What is going on? Are you doing something to me? Is that what this is all about?" The accusation hung in the air, so monstrous I couldn't breathe. She had done it. With a few well-placed whispers and a couple of props, she had perfectly flipped the script. I was no longer the protector, I was the threat. Liam wasn't looking at me with confusion anymore. He was looking at me with genuine fear. Catherine hadn't just sown doubt. She had planted terror, and it was taking root in the heart of the man I was trying to save. I was trapped, silenced by an accusation so vile it left me speechless. She wasn't just planning to kill my husband. She was trying to erase me first. To be accused of the very crime you are trying to expose is a special kind of hell. In the days following the discovery of the planted book and bottle, my home became a mausoleum. Liam moved into the guest bedroom. He spoke to me only when necessary, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear, as if I were a fragile object that had suddenly revealed a crack. I was no longer his wife. I was his problem. His mother, on the other hand, was a vision of triumphant concern. She would call him daily, her voice dripping with sympathy. I had been neutralized. In her eyes, the game was already over. And that was her first mistake. She underestimated what a woman with nothing left to lose is capable of. My words were worthless. My evidence was now considered part of my delusion. There was only one thing left that could cut through the fog of Catherine's manipulation: a picture. An undeniable, irrefutable image of her in the act. I knew this was my last shot. If I failed, I wouldn't just lose my husband. I might lose my freedom. The next morning, I drove 45 minutes north to a strip mall in Goose Creek, a place I was certain I wouldn't run into anyone I knew. I paid cash for the smallest nanny cam in the store, one cleverly disguised as a USB phone charger. It was a tiny, black square of plastic. It was my last hope. Setting the trap required me to perform the most humiliating act of my life. I had to surrender. That evening, I went to the guest room and apologized to Liam. I cried. I told him he was right, that the stress of his father's illness had made me paranoid, that I was seeing monsters in the shadows. I told him the book was a stupid, morbid purchase from a flea market, and the bottle was an old herbal tincture a friend had given me for sleep. The lies tasted like ash in my mouth, but he needed to believe them. He was wary, but he was so desperate for the nightmare to be over that he accepted my surrender. To prove I was better, I suggested we invite Catherine over for Sunday dinner, to clear the air and apologize to her too. He agreed, his relief palpable. The day of the dinner, my heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had plugged the camera into a low socket on the kitchen island, the one directly across from the main food prep area. It had a perfect panoramic view. I had tested it a dozen times. The battery was full, the memory card was empty. All I could do now was wait. Catherine arrived, glowing with victory. I played my part, giving her a meek, tearful apology for my recent behavior. She accepted it with the magnanimity of a queen, forgiving a lowly subject. Dinner was excruciating. I moved through the motions, a hollow shell of a hostess. Then came dessert, angel food cake with a special raspberry coulis. Catherine shooed me out of the kitchen. No, Eliza dear, you've done enough. Let me finish this. This was it. I hovered in the doorway, pretending to admire the flowers in the dining room, my entire being focused on the scene in the kitchen. Liam was on the porch, taking a call. Catherine was humming, pouring the deep red sauce into a serving bowl. Her back was to the doorway, but she was in full view of the camera. She reached into her purse. My breath hitched. Her hand emerged, holding the small dark amber bottle. It was a movement so practiced, so fluid, it was almost invisible. The cap twisted. Her hand hovered over the bowl. A single dark drop fell into the red sauce. She stirred it once, twice, with a silver spoon, then screwed the cap back on and slipped the bottle back into her purse. The entire act took less than 5 seconds. A ghost of a crime. But the camera didn't blink. Have you ever seen something with your own eyes that was so horrible, so definitive, that the world just stopped for a second? The moment when suspicion becomes certainty? If you know that feeling, I want you to just type a single period in the comments. Nothing more. It's a full stop, the end of all doubt. I had to physically grip the door frame to keep from collapsing. I felt no triumph. Just a profound, icy calm. The hunt was over. She was mine. The rest of that Sunday dinner was the most surreal performance of my life. I had a nuclear bomb in my pocket, a 5-second video that could vaporize our family, and I had to sit there and make small talk about the weather. Catherine, oblivious and basking in her perceived victory, brought the angel food cake to the table. "And for my darling boy," she said, holding the bowl of raspberry coulis. "A little something sweet to make up for his wife's sour mood lately." She winked at Liam. It was a cruel, triumphant little jab. As she moved to spoon the glossy red sauce over his cake, my instincts took over. My hand shot out, accidentally knocking my water glass. Ice and water cascaded across the table, soaking the tablecloth and splashing directly onto the cake and into the bowl of sauce. "Oh my goodness!" I gasped, feigning mortification. "I am so clumsy. Catherine, I am terribly sorry. I've ruined it." Catherine's face tightened with annoyance, but she quickly smoothed it over. "Clumsy is right," she muttered, before forcing a smile. "Don't worry, dear. It's just a cake." Liam, embarrassed by the commotion, just shook his head. The moment passed. The dessert was ruined, but Liam was safe. It was a small, messy victory. After Catherine left, the chill between us returned, now laced with Liam's irritation over my stunt at dinner. He retreated to the guest room without a word. The house was silent, but for me, it was screaming. I held the truth on a tiny memory card, a truth so monstrous, I wasn't sure how to unleash it without destroying everything. I couldn't wait. Every moment I delayed felt like a betrayal to the man sleeping down the hall, a man who had no idea how close he had just come to being poisoned again. An hour later, I walked to the guest room and opened the door without knocking. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, the picture of a man burdened by the world. He looked up, his expression guarded, expecting another apology or more tears. I offered neither. I walked over to him, my movements calm and deliberate, and held out my phone. "Liam," I said, my voice low and even, all the pleading and panic gone. "I am not going to ask you to believe me. I am not going to show you a list. I am just going to show you what happened in our kitchen this evening while you were on the porch." His jaw tightened, ready for an argument. "Eliza, I told you. Just watch," I whispered, pressing play and placing the phone in his hand. I stepped back and watched him. The only light in the dark room came from the phone's screen, illuminating his face. The video was on a silent loop. The first time it played, he looked confused, his brow furrowed. It was just his mother in the kitchen. The second time, he leaned closer, his eyes narrowing on her hands. I saw him register the small, dark bottle. The third time, I saw the exact moment the truth hit him. It wasn't a slow dawn, it was a physical blow. A sudden, sharp intake of breath. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a waxy, sickly gray. His hands began to tremble, and the phone clattered from his grasp onto the duvet. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the blank wall opposite him, his eyes wide with a horror that was beyond words. He played it again in his mind. I could see it. The casual, practiced gesture. The stir of the spoon. The loving smile she had given him moments later. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were shattered. The anger was gone. The denial was gone. All that was left was a profound, bottomless ocean of pain. He didn't speak. He just made a sound, a choked, guttural sob that seemed to be torn from the deepest part of his soul. It was the sound of a heartbreaking, of a lifetime of love and trust turning to ash in a single, silent moment. I went to him then, wrapping my arms around him as he collapsed into me, sobbing uncontrollably. The fight to make him believe was over. But as I held my broken husband, I knew the war had just begun. The man I held that night was not my husband. He was the ghost of my husband, a hollowed-out shell of grief. For the next 24 hours, he barely spoke. He didn't go to work. He just sat in the study with the door closed. I would bring him coffee, and hours later I'd find the mug untouched, cold. I knew he was in there watching that 5-second video on a loop, trying to reconcile the image on the screen with the woman who had raised him, praised him, and loved him. He was mourning the loss of his mother, a loss that was somehow more profound because she was still alive. I knew I couldn't rush him. This was a grief he had to walk through alone. It was late the following afternoon when he finally emerged from the study. The sorrow was still in his eyes, but it was now banked, like coals. Underneath it, something new was burning. A cold, hard, terrifying fury. The softness was gone. The son who had made excuses for his mother was gone. In his place, stood the CEO of a shipping empire, a man whose entire world had been revealed as a lie, and who was now ready to take control. He looked directly at me, and for the first time since our fight, he truly saw me. The apology was in his eyes, clear and deep. "I'm sorry, Eliza," he said, his voice raw. "I am so sorry I didn't see it." Then his expression hardened. "Call her," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Tell her I need to see her immediately. Tell her it's about the fleet modernization deal. Tell her I'm ready to sign." It was the perfect bait. An hour later, Catherine swept into our home, radiating a confident maternal authority. She was dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, ready to do business, ready to wield the power she held over her son. We were waiting for her in the formal living room, a space we never used. The air was cold, the antique furniture like silent witnesses. "Liam, darling," she began, moving to kiss his cheek, but he took a small step back, gesturing to the armchair opposite him. "Sit down, mother," he said. The word mother sounded like a curse. She sat, her smile faltering slightly at his tone. He let the silence stretch for a moment before he spoke. "I've been feeling unwell for months now," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "We thought it was stress, but it seems to be a recurring pattern. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what it could be." Catherine launched into her well-rehearsed performance. "Oh, my poor boy, I've been saying it for weeks. You're pushing yourself too hard. You need rest, proper food." "I don't think it's the stress," Liam interrupted, his voice like ice. He leaned forward, placed my phone on the polished mahogany coffee table, and pressed play. The tiny, silent video filled the suffocating quiet of the room. Catherine's eyes darted to the screen. I saw the flash of recognition, the second of pure panic as she realized what she was seeing. The mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated, but she didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She watched the video loop twice, and then a strange, chilling expression crossed her face. It was annoyance. She let out a long, theatrical sigh, as if we were two children who had just presented her with a mess she now had to clean up. "Why?" Liam's voice was a choked whisper. "Just tell me why." She looked at her son, the boy she had raised, and spoke with the cold clarity of a sociopath. "Because you were in the way," she said simply, as if explaining a business transaction. "Your father is going to die, Liam, soon. And everything he built, everything I sacrificed my entire life to maintain, belongs to me. It is my due. But the will forces me to share." She gestured vaguely at me. "You have her. You have your whole life ahead of you. You don't need all this. I, on the other hand, am not willing to spend my golden years on half of what I'm owed." Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's mask came off so completely that it left you breathless? The instant you realized you weren't dealing with a flawed person, but with something truly dark? Let me know. Were you ever the one to see the truth? Type "I saw it" if you know this chilling moment. The confession was so blatant, so devoid of shame or love, that it was more shocking than the video itself. We were not dealing with a mother. We were dealing with a monster. And in that moment, in the cold, silent living room, the plan for our revenge was born. After Catherine walked out, leaving her confession hanging in the air like poison gas, the silence she left behind was different. It wasn't the silence of grief or confusion anymore. It was the calm, clean silence of a battlefield after the first, shocking volley has been fired, and the objective is now terrifyingly clear. Liam stood motionless for a long time, staring at the door she had just closed. The son who had wept in my arms was gone. In his place was a man I had never seen before, his face carved from ice. The love he'd had for his mother his entire life had been cauterized in a single, brutal moment, leaving nothing behind but a cold, sterile scar. My first instinct was primal. "We have to call the police," I said, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "We have the video, Liam. We have her confession. It's over." "No." His voice was quiet, but it had the finality of a gavel striking wood. He turned to face me, and his eyes were the eyes of a CEO analyzing a hostile takeover. "It's not over, it's just beginning." He started pacing, not with panic, but with the focused energy of a predator. "Think about it, Eliza. We call the police. What happens? A media circus. The family name, the company my grandfather built, dragged through the mud for years. My father's last days would become a spectacle for the entire city of Charleston to gossip about over their cocktails. And she'd fight it. She'd hire the best lawyers money can buy. She'd paint you as a manipulative gold digger and me as a weak, grieving son you've turned against his own mother. She would tell them about the book, the bottle she planted. It would be a disgusting public war, and she's been fighting wars like this in secret her whole life. We might win, we might not. He stopped and looked at me, his expression grim. And even if we did, what does she lose? Her freedom. But that's not what she's afraid of. Catherine isn't afraid of a prison cell. She's afraid of being irrelevant. She's terrified of being powerless. The cruelest punishment for a woman like that isn't to lock her away. It's to take away her prize. It's to leave her with nothing but her own bitterness. We're not going to put her in jail, Eliza. We are going to bankrupt her legacy. We are going to beat her at her own game. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. It was the hospice nurse who was staying at his father's house. I watched as Liam's face grew even paler. He hung up the phone, his hand resting on it for a moment. "That was Sarah," he said quietly. "The doctor was just there. He doesn't think my father has more than a few days left. A week, if he's lucky." The air crackled with a sudden, terrifying urgency. The clock had just started ticking. The 30-day window Catherine had been waiting for was about to open. Our objective materialized in that moment, simple and monumental. We had to get to Walter. We had to have him change the will. But is he lucid enough? I asked, my mind racing. Can he legally sign a document? I don't know, Liam admitted, and Catherine is always there. She guards him like a dragon guards its gold. We'll never get to him alone. For a moment, we were stuck. Then, a slow, cunning smile spread across Liam's face. It was a chilling expression, one I recognized from his mother. He picked up his phone. "She's a trustee," he said. "And she just tried to kill the CEO. It's time to use the company against her." He explained the plan. He would call an emergency board meeting for the following afternoon, across town at the main corporate office. The topic: the final, urgent signing of the $10 million fleet modernization contract. As trustee, her presence was mandatory. Her ego would never allow her to miss a chance to preside over such a massive deal. It would give us a window, a few precious hours to get to his father. I watched as he composed himself, his face softening back into the mask of the dutiful, stressed son. He dialed her number. "Mother," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of weary resignation. "We need you. The deal is happening tomorrow at 2. We can't do it without you." He listened for a moment, then gave me a subtle nod. The bait was in the water. The race against death had begun. The next morning was eerily calm. The storm had broken, and Liam and I were now in its quiet, focused eye. We moved around the kitchen making coffee, not speaking but communicating with a silent, synchronized intensity. We were a team again, bound by a grim and terrible purpose. There was no more fear, no more doubt. There was only the plan. At 1:45 p.m., Liam's phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Catherine. "On my way to the office. Don't start without me." The bait was taken. The clock had started. We had at most a 3-hour window. We had already called Mr. Abernathy, the family's longtime estate lawyer. He was an old-school Charleston gentleman, a man whose loyalty, we hoped, was to the patriarch, Walter, and not to the matriarch, Catherine. We told him there was a family emergency regarding the will, and that he needed to meet us at Walter's house at 2:30 p.m., and to bring the necessary documents to draft a codicil. He was hesitant, his voice tight with professional caution, but the urgency in Liam's tone must have convinced him. He agreed. We drove to the old family home on the Battery, the one place I had always felt like an outsider. Today, I walked in like a soldier on a mission. The hospice nurse, Sarah, met us at the door. "He's been sleeping," she whispered, "but he's been calmer today." We walked into the grand, shadowed bedroom where Walter lay. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and fading life. He was so frail, a pale shadow against the crisp white pillows, his breath a shallow whisper. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought we were too late. Liam knelt by the bed and took his father's thin, translucent hand. He didn't mention the poison, the betrayal. To burden a dying man with such a horror would have been its own kind of cruelty. Instead, he spoke of the future. He spoke of his love for me, his desire to protect our family, and his need to secure the company's legacy on his own terms. "Dad," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I need your help. I need you to trust me. I need you to make me strong enough to stand on my own." Walter's eyelids fluttered. He turned his head, his gaze finding Liam's. And in their depths, for just a moment, the fog cleared. I saw a flash of the titan of industry, the brilliant man he had once been. He understood. A faint, raspy sound came from his throat, and he squeezed Liam's hand. Just then, Mr. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, his leather briefcase in hand. He assessed the scene with a grave expression. He walked to the bed and spoke to Walter in a clear, respectful voice, asking him the date, his full name, the name of the current president. Walter's answers were faint, whispered, but they were correct. He was lucid. It was legal. Mr. Abernathy wasted no time. He laid the documents on the bedside table. "Walter," he said, "please confirm that this is your wish." In a low, formal tone, he read the amendments aloud. First, that the entire estate, valued at over $3.5 million, was to pass solely to his son Liam. Second, that the survivorship clause was to be altered, ensuring that in the event of Liam's death, his inheritance would pass to his wife Eliza, not revert to Catherine. And third, the final, brutal masterstroke of revenge. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "And to my wife Catherine," he read, "for reasons she will understand, I leave the sum of $1. A tear traced a path down Walter's wrinkled cheek. He nodded. The signing was an agony of suspense. Walter's hand shook so violently that Liam had to steady it, his own hand covering his father's. The pen moved with excruciating slowness, scratching out a weak, spidery signature that was, nonetheless, legally binding. The nurse and Mr. Abernathy signed as witnesses. It was done. The trap was shut. The Queen had been toppled from the board. There are moments in life that feel like pure justice. A final, righteous act that sets everything right. If you believe that sometimes the quietest actions can be the most powerful form of revenge, just write the word justice in the comments below. As Mr. Abernathy placed the signed document securely in his briefcase, my phone vibrated. A text from Catherine. "Meeting is running late. Some complications. Be there in 20. We had done it. And now, the storm was about to break. The moment Mr. Abernathy closed his briefcase, a profound quiet settled over the room. The legal machinery had done its work. The gears of justice, so slow to turn, had finally locked into place. Liam sat holding his father's hand, a silent conversation passing between them. Walter's breathing was even, peaceful. He had done his final duty as a father, protecting his son from beyond the veil of consciousness. The tension that had been a constant companion for months seemed to evaporate from my own shoulders. We had won. The victory felt solemn, heavy, and deeply sad. We sat in that quiet for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. Then we heard it. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, a car door slamming with sharp, impatient authority. The Queen was returning to her castle. Catherine swept in like a storm front, her face a mask of irritation from her wasted afternoon. "What an absolute circus," she announced to the empty hallway. "Half of the board members didn't even bother to show up, a complete waste of my sting." She stopped dead in the doorway of the bedroom, her eyes taking in the scene. Me, sitting quietly in a chair. Liam, holding his father's hand. Her perfectly composed face tightened, her eyes narrowing with instant suspicion. "Liam, what are you doing here? I thought you were stuck at the office, and why is she here?" Liam rose from his chair slowly, deliberately. He didn't look angry. He looked empty, free. "The meeting was a fiction, Mother," he said, his voice calm and even. "It was designed to get you out of the house." Her face, for the first time since I had known her, registered pure, unadulterated shock. The mask fell away. "What? What are you talking about?" "We had our own meeting. Here, with Father. And Mr. Abernathy," he continued, his words falling like stones into the silent room. "Father was lucid. He made some changes. To the will." The color drained from her face. She looked from Liam's implacable expression to my quiet stillness, to the frail figure of her husband sleeping peacefully in the bed. The pieces clicked together in her mind with an audible snap. She understood everything. The illusion of control she had so carefully constructed had been shattered while she was across town playing the part of the powerful trustee. "You!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, all southern charm burned away to reveal the viper beneath. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You twisted his mind, you manipulated a dying, senile old man." "He was perfectly sane." Liam's voice cut through her tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. Mr. Abernathy confirmed it. The nurse witnessed it. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was protecting his son. He was protecting his family. He took a step towards her. "From you." That was when she broke. The cold, calculating matriarch vanished, replaced by a creature of pure, narcissistic rage. It was an explosion. "Ungrateful!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "After everything I have done for you, I gave you life, I built this family, and you let this little gold-digging whore turn you against me." She lunged toward the bed, her hands like claws, as if she could physically shake the truth out of her dying husband. I flinched, but Liam moved with a speed I'd never seen. He stepped directly in her path, a solid, immovable wall between his mother and his father. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The authority in his tone was absolute. "Get out," he said. It was two simple words, but they carried the weight of a final judgment. "Get out of this house. You will not come back. You will not be at his funeral. You will not call me. You will not write to me. From this moment on, you are a stranger to me." She stared at him, her chest heaving, her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. She saw in his eyes that it was over. The game was lost. The son she had tried to mold, control, and ultimately destroy was gone forever. With a final, guttural scream of frustration, she spun around, snatched her purse, and stormed out of the room, out of the house, and out of our lives. We heard her car peel out of the driveway, spitting gravel. And then there was only silence. A clean, profound, and final silence. Walter passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 days later. Catherine was not there. The $1 check from the estate was, as instructed, mailed to a P.O. box. We never saw her again. You would think that after the dragon has been slain, the heroes get to live happily ever after. But the stories never tell you about the quiet, empty days that follow the battle. They don't tell you about the wreckage. After Walter's funeral, a quiet, dignified affair, our life in Charleston became unbearable. The city itself felt haunted. Every graceful, wrought-iron gate, every grand, columned porch seemed to whisper Catherine's name. The friends who came to offer condolences would speak of her in hushed, confused tones. "Have you heard from your mother? Is she all right?" And the lie we had to tell, a vague story about her needing time away to grieve, felt like swallowing shards of glass. The poison was gone from our food, but it felt like it had seeped into the very foundations of the city we called home. Liam was adrift in a sea of complex grief. He mourned his father deeply, but he was also mourning his mother, a living ghost who had authored the most profound betrayal of his life. How do you grieve for someone who isn't dead, but is dead to you? How do you reconcile a lifetime of loving memories with a monstrous truth? There were days he wouldn't speak at all, just sit in his father's empty study, staring at the walls as if trying to solve an impossible equation. And I had my own ghost to battle. I would wake up from nightmares where I was screaming, and no one would believe me. I'd find myself checking the locks 3 times, a residual paranoia I couldn't shake. The trauma had left scars on both of us, invisible but deep. We had won the war, but we were casualties. About 6 months after the funeral, on a quiet Sunday morning, Liam came to me in the garden. "I can't breathe here anymore, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Everywhere I look, I see her. I see him. I can't heal. In a haunted house." In that moment, I knew he was right. Charleston wasn't our home. It was their legacy. And we needed to build our own. That decision was the beginning of our real recovery. We put the house on the market. Liam, in a move that shocked the city's business community, announced he was stepping down as CEO. He arranged a sale of his controlling shares to a trusted group of senior partners, ensuring the company his father's true legacy was in safe hands. He was finally cutting the last of his mother's strings. We moved across the country to a small town in coastal Oregon, a place where the air was cool and smelled of pine and the ocean, not jasmine and decay, a place where the name Montgomery meant nothing. We bought a modest, modern house with huge windows that looked out into a forest. It was the antithesis of the dark, heavy history of our Charleston home. Liam started a small, independent financial consulting firm, working from a home office. He was happier and more relaxed than I had ever seen him. I started my own landscape design studio, specializing in creating peaceful, restorative gardens for people. I was, quite literally, helping life grow again. The truth is, the horror of what we went through didn't tear us apart. It fused us together. It burned away all the trivialities of a marriage, all the small, unspoken resentments, and left only the essential core. We had seen the absolute worst, and we had chosen to stand together. Our communication became brutally, beautifully honest. We talked about our fears, our nightmares. We learned to be patient with each other's healing. Family, we learned, wasn't the blood you shared. It wasn't an inheritance or a name. It was a choice. A conscious, daily choice to build a fortress of trust and protection around another person. It's the person who, when you whisper that there's a monster under the bed, doesn't tell you you're crazy. They get a flashlight and help you look. Before we left Charleston, Liam and I went down into the basement one last time. We opened the deep freezer. The small jars and bags were still there, a frozen museum of our nightmare. We looked at them, then at each other. Without a word, we took the entire collection and threw it all into a single, black trash bag. We didn't need it anymore. The truth had set us free. It's been 5 years since we left Charleston. Sometimes, when I'm out in my garden here in Oregon, with the cool, clean air on my face and my hands in the soil, I'll think of that old life. It feels like a story I read about someone else, a lifetime away. The ghosts of that grand, haunted house no longer follow us. Liam and I, we survived. But more than that, we chose to heal. We learned that the most powerful form of revenge isn't a dramatic confrontation or a legal victory. The ultimate revenge is living well. It's the quiet joy of a Tuesday morning, the shared laughter over a simple meal that you know is safe, the profound peace of building a life on a foundation of absolute trust. Catherine tried to poison our future, to steal it for herself, but her poison only worked as long as we were living within the walls she had built. The moment we chose to walk away, to burn the map and draw our own, her power over us evaporated. She wanted a legacy of wealth and control, but in the end, her legacy is one of empty silence. Our legacy is this quiet, beautiful life we built from the ashes. It's a testament to the fact that you can survive the unthinkable, and that true family is not something you are born into, but something you have the courage to build for yourself. The world may never know what you've been through, the private wars you have fought and won, but we do. This community does. If these stories speak your truth, subscribe and join us. You are not alone here. The poison is gone, and in its place we chose to plant a garden.